Welcome to the first lesson of the year where we're going to deal with rational and irrational numbers. Remember, rational numbers are any numbers that can be written as a fraction. Therefore, irrational numbers are those numbers that cannot be written as a fraction. So before we get started, we have some vocabulary that we need to go over. A rational number is any number that can be written as a fraction. I just said that. Whole numbers, fractions, and decimals are all examples of rational numbers. We have two different types of decimals that we're going to deal with today. First one are called terminating decimals. These are the ones that we're used to. These are decimals that have an ending. So if I had the decimal 0.125 and that was it, that's a terminating decimal. But I also have a second type of decimal called a repeating decimal. These are ones that go on forever in a certain pattern. So if I have something like 0.161616, so on, and it just keeps repeating 16161616, that is a repeating decimal. It's a decimal that will never stop, but it continues in a pattern. Okay, and we have a way of writing these decimals. We put a bar on top of them, and that's something that we did learn in 7th grade, hopefully that you remember. So the first thing that I want to review quickly is just turning decimals into, or fractions into decimals. So for example, the first one, it says write 1/4 as a decimal. So when we want to turn fractions into decimals, we divide our denominator into our numerator. And that means our numerator drops into the house. So what we have is, for the first one, we have 1 divided by 4. And let me just move that down a little bit so I have some space to write. And we know that obviously 4 does not go into 1. So what I have to do is I have to add my decimal point, because there's always a decimal point to the right of a whole number, and add my 0. And I divide. 4 goes into 10 2 times. And I'm left with 2, so I add another 0 and I bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times, and 5 times 4 is 20, so there's no remainder. Since there's no remainder, I have a terminating decimal, and that terminating decimal is 0.25, which we should know that 1/4 is 0.25 as a decimal, but it's an easy way to show how to figure that out. Our second example says to write 1/3 as a decimal. So we go through the same process. We drop the 1 into the house, and we have 1 divided by 3. Obviously 3 doesn't go into 1, that's why we have a fraction. We put in our decimal point, bring it up to the top, add a 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. I have 1 left over, adding another 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. And by now you should see, sorry, let me erase that. You should kind of start to see the pattern that no matter what, it's always going to be 0.33333333 forever. Because no matter what I do, I'm going to get 3 times 3, which is 9. Subtract it from 10, that leaves me a remainder of 1 again. So I have a repeating decimal, and that repeating decimal is 0.3. Then line over the 3, and that tells me that that 3 repeats on and on and on forever. Remember, the bar only goes over the number that is repeating. So I want you to take a second, pause the video, and try these on your own, and then come back and just check your work with my work. So number 1, I drop 5 into the house, and I divide 11 into 5. Okay, I add my 0, put my decimal point on top, goes in 4 times, leaves me with 6. Bring down my 0. 11 goes into 60 5 times, so I subtract 55. I could bring down another 0, I could keep going, but I see that I start back with the 50 that I began with. And if I start what I began with, then I'm just going to keep repeating the same pattern over and over again. So what I have is 0.45, and both the 4 and the 5 repeat. So my answer is 0.45. I have a repeating decimal. Number 2, I have 1/8. Drop my 1 to the house, I have 8 going into 1. 8 goes into 10 1 time. I have 2. Gotta keep going because I don't have anything repeating. I haven't ended yet. 8 goes into 20 2 times. Minus 16, that leaves me to 4. Bring down my 0. 8 goes into 40 5 times. I'm left with a remainder of 0. So I'm finished. I have a terminating decimal, and that terminating decimal is 0.125. Okay, the last one, number 3, is 2 1/3. So I'm not worried about that whole number. I can put the whole number in front, and I can just turn the fraction into a decimal part and put that decimal after my whole number. And if you remember before, we already know that 1/3 is 0.3 repeating. In the case we need to show our work, 3 goes into 10, 3 times, minus 9, 1, bring down my 0, and I can already see I have 10, I have 10, so it's going to keep repeating. So I put my line over it, and I just take that repeating portion, that 0.3 with a line over it, and I put it next to my 2. So I have 2.3 with the 3 repeating. Remember, it's important that the line only goes over the part of the number that is repeating. The 2 is not repeating, just that decimal 0.3 is repeating. So the line needs to just go over 0.3 and not 2. So that is turning fractions into decimals. We also have the ability to take our decimals and turn them back into fractions. We need to remember our place values. We need to remember our tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, and so on. It goes on forever. The reason why is because that helps us to write them as fractions. We just simply put the decimal over the ending place value. So in this case, this decimal part ends in the 10,000ths. So I would put 1,427 over 10,000, and then I can just simplify that. Okay, we're going to work with numbers obviously that are a little bit smaller than that most of the time. So let's take a look at our first example for this. We have write 0.825 as a fraction. If I read this out in word forms, I have 825 thousandths. That is the decimal in word form. Okay, the word form is important because it really helps me figure out what number goes in the denominator. So if I have 825 thousandths, that means I have the fraction 825 over 1,000. Okay, and now I look and I'm trying to figure out how I can simplify this. Just looking at it right away, I know since this one ends in 25 and this one's 1,000, that 25 should go into both of them. So I can simplify it a little bit by dividing the numerator and the denominator by 25. When I divide 825 by 25, I get 33. And when I divide 1,000 divided by 25, I get 40. 33, 3 goes into it, but 3 doesn't go into 40. 11 goes into it, but 11 doesn't go into 40. It doesn't seem like there's anything else I can do to simplify it, so I leave my answer 33 over 40. If you were to simplify by dividing the numerator and denominator by 5, it would work. You would just have to then simplify it some more. It would not come out to the most simplest fraction. So you have to keep simplifying until you get it down to the point where you can't simplify it anymore. I can't simplify 33 over 40, so my fraction is 33 over 40. Remember to always put your answers in simplest form. Take a shot at your turn, pause the video, then come back and check your answers with my answers. So let's start by taking a look at number 4. What I have is 12 hundredths. So I write my number 12 over 100, and then I simplify. Obviously 2 goes into both of them, so I'll start with 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 100 divided by 2 is 50. They're both even numbers, so I know I can keep dividing by 2, and I get 3 over 25, which is the fraction in simplest form. So my first answer, 12 hundredths in fraction form, is 3 25ths. And sorry, I can't really fit it into that little space. We're going to skip number 5 for now, and we're going to go on to number 6. Remember, same thing as we did with fractions. We don't worry about the whole number. We get rid of the whole number. We just put it up here. We know it's going to go there. And then we put whatever our fraction part is next to it. So we have 4/10. So I write it as 4/10, which I can divide both by 2 and simplify it to 2/5. That is it in simplest form. So my answer is 1, my whole number stays, and, 2/5. Okay, it's that simple. Figure out the decimal portion, add your whole number back onto the front. Okay, so that's an important skill, turning fractions into decimals, decimals into fractions. That's the first half of our notes. That's all we're going to work on right now. We'll come back later and we'll work on the rest. We'll work on squared and cube roots. So if you have any questions, please make sure you ask, leave in the comment section, or whatever you need to do.